Hello, and welcome to Women's Health. Women's Health is a program that is put on by the Women's Foundation of Lincoln and Lancaster County. My name is Kathie Uhrmacher. I am the president of the Women's Foundation, and we welcome you today. We're going to be talking about suicide. First of all, I want to introduce my guest. My guest is Terri Effle, who is Region 5 Systems, I got that right, preventative specialist. And Terri has a lot of really important information to share with us today, and so we thank you very much for being here.
Sure, thanks for having me.
This is a really serious subject, and what we want to do for you today is to go through some basics about suicide, some things that you might not know, or maybe some things you do, but to help you to get a better sense of suicide as it stands right now in our community, but also some warning signs, some things that you can look for. And then at the end, we'd like to finish up by talking about a new initiative that's very exciting called Hope Squads, which is exactly as it says, bringing us hope. So first of all, Terri, let's start out by talking about some just general statistics.
Sure.
How does Lincoln compare with other places? Are we seeing more or less? Can you give us just a sort of a brief idea on that?
I sure can. Tom Cassidy does a great job of tracking the statistics yearly for suicide. And so the last year in 2018, we had 34 people who died by suicide in Lincoln, and 7 of those were young people.
Young people.
So we are a little higher than the national average, and actually a little higher than the state average, and not just in Lincoln, but the whole kind of southeast corner of Nebraska sort of follows that trend. But nationally, Nebraska and nationally, it's the second leading cause of death for young people. When I say that, I mean from 10 to 24.
Okay.
So 10 would be about 4th grade, which seems awfully young.
It is.
And then 24, so it goes through college. So I think we sometimes think it's middle school, high school, and those are certainly times where there's lots of transition and lots of pressure, but it can go younger than that and certainly goes older than that.
Goes
and
older
so
than that.
nationally, we lose a young person to suicide less than every 2 minutes.
Is that right?
So yeah, if that puts it in some
It's
perspective for
staggering,
you.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, it really is. So what are the most common types of suicide?
So it varies a little bit for all ages. For adults, firearms is in the #1 spot. For young people, in 2018 it was hanging, and then firearms was in the 2nd position. But really, a lot of this is about restricting means. So if I have firearms in the house, how am I securing those? Being very thoughtful about how I put things away, and if I have someone at risk, or even if I suspect somebody might be at risk, we just get that out of the house. You know, either we have it locked up or we have it just gone. Someone else is holding it. Big Shots in town has done some neat stuff with helping people sort of restrict means. There have been several initiatives that have provided lock boxes to secure handguns and gun locks to secure long guns. So there's a lot out there to help kind of restrict means, but for sure anything, medication, make sure that that's locked up, and make sure you know what you have in the house and who has access to that.
Right, right. So is it more women or men that commit suicide?
That's a good question. So women attempt more and men complete more.
Really?
At about 3 times. Women attempt 3 times more. So that has to do again with means. Women would tend more toward medication. Men would tend more toward firearms, and that's not always to say that it's one or the other, but that's just the tendency in the data. So yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's not the same for both,
Right.
and that would be true of both young people and adults.
And that is true for young people as well. Okay.
Sure
So
is.
so what are some of the risk factors? Obviously, lots of people go through lots of different things, and some people attempt suicide and some don't. So
Right.
what are some of the risk factors for those who might try?
So it falls into a couple of different buckets. If I have a mental health concern that's sort of ongoing, then that would mean that would look different for me. Wellness in my life would look different if I am dealing with depression or a mental health, a mental illness or a mental health concern that's sort of an ongoing thing. But it can also, and I think sometimes we assume that it has to have been, oh, they must have been depressed or they must have, something must have been going on, and that's true a lot of the time. But it can also be substance use. So any episode of substance use, particularly if I'm under the influence of alcohol, but certainly other drugs. Alcohol is just most common. And then also crisis situations that can evolve. And for young people in particular, they don't tend to be really long-range planners, which would be true of sort of how they live their lives, very in the moment. And so they may go from a crisis happens or something unexpected happens, and then it escalates very quickly to they are in a state of panic that causes them to maybe take a rash action. And there again, that's not true in 100% of cases, but often, it goes very quickly from crisis to action for kids. So risk factors would include people who are under a tremendous amount of pressure. So in today's world, that's all of us. I just look at even our son and think, wow, you grew up in a different world from me. I had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood, but he's not known anything else. At 19, and so there's just a lot of pressure, and they live sort of on stage all the time. And you can compare yourself not just to your family or your classmates, but there's a worldwide stage that we're compared on, and we forget sometimes. I think when we're talking in those terms that people are listening and taking that very much to heart, even if we compare across cultures or across, nations, that they take that to heart and think, wow, I'm under all of this pressure to perform and to hit the bar, and it's set very high, and perfectionism, those kinds of things. So, and then other things that you might expect if there's a loss in the family, or I lose somebody that's close to me, loss of any major relationship. And for young people, they determine what makes a relationship major. Sometimes I think as a parent, I would look and think, well, that's the breaks, and there'll be other days, but it doesn't always look like that when you're living it. So loss of relationship, a loss by suicide puts people at greater risk for suicide themselves, a lot of times because we don't seek help. There's so much stigma kind of behind it that it makes it, we have just lots of feelings, and it's complicated. All grief is complicated.
That's true.
But with suicide, there's an extra layer there.
Right. So when you're talking to someone, what are some of the signs? What should you look for?
So some of these will sound really common. I feel like we all kind of know that if they're giving things away.
As in material possessions?
Sometimes, so prized possessions. If you see them give, a baseball bat that they've used their entire career away, or a piece of jewelry, and in today's world, there's so much digital capital for young people. If I were to give away passwords, or, it can look like anything. I think our gut will tell us, oh, that seems very strange, or I'm not sure what that means, or if they're arranging for care for pets, or, I just want to know you take care of that. That would always be worth turning around and saying, tell me why you're asking. I'm curious what's going on, why you would ask that. And it doesn't have to be a big formal type of intervention, but just that we check on each other. And make it a habit to check on each other. I think years ago we sort of did that because we just lived in such tight community. You were with people all the time, and we just worked and lived hand in hand. And today we're so separated. We're more back deck than front porch in most cases. So we don't want to we don't want to intrude. We don't want to be nosy. We don't want. It feels like an imposition when really. Most people who are in crisis would really like someone to step in.
They do.
Yeah, whether that's I'm experiencing a crisis personally, or I'm living with someone who's experienced a crisis and we don't know how to handle it, like we're just overwhelmed, like having anybody step in and offer aid and offer hope is tremendously helpful, more hopeful and helpful than we realize.
So giving away material possessions is one thing. Are there other things for us to watch for?
Yep, if I've experienced a loss, particularly anybody who's been connected to somebody who died by suicide, that would make me want to watch. Any rapid change in my emotions or my state of being, and people will laugh when we do trainings and they'll say, have you been with an adolescent antidepressant lately, moody and depressed, or, they're angry, that can be par for the course with typical development, and that's so true. But this would be a change that you've noticed, like they were one way and now they seem to be another way. Or if I've been with somebody, an adult or a young person, who's been very down, and we've kind of been through crisis, and we've been, we know that it's been a struggle for a long time, and then all of a sudden they just seem to have turned on a dime. And they seem to be happy and light, and like it's just a 180 from how they have been. That might be worth following up on, like, oh, talk to me. I mean, I think we experience a sense of relief and think, oh, good. Maybe they've rounded the corner or whatever, and it could be that, but it could also be that I've made a decision and I'm at peace with that. Like,
so
now that I've decided.
that's why they appear to be better then.
Yeah, lighthearted because I've just made a decision. So just any sort of drastic change from one way to another, it's always worth kind of following up on, because it could be a sign of something like suicide or a mental health concern. It could also be physical. Like, there's a lot that could be going on, and we should just check. We should just check. We would want to know any of that particularly.
So what kind of questions should we ask then? I mean, I think sometimes because we're afraid of imposing or
Sure.
whatever, I'm not sure that all of us feel like we know what to say or what to ask. So what would be some things that you would advise if we see these behaviors that you've just been talking about? What are some of the things that we should say?
Sure. Always care and concern. Relationship is huge with any of this stuff, and you can do this sort of thing with a complete stranger. If you've ever heard of Kevin Hines, he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived, and has used his story to really do some neat work nationwide. But he talks about riding the bus to the bridge and just wishing that somebody would ask, "Are you okay?" So you can ask a complete stranger, but most of the time it will probably be somebody you have relationship with. So lead with care and concern. Like, here's what I've noticed. Here are the things that I've seen that cause me to be concerned, and I'm wondering if you're okay. And it is okay to be very direct and say, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?" Which is which is such a bald statement.
It is.
And it feels, even just saying it out loud there, like there's just your stomach flutters a little bit, like there's a lot of stigma behind that. But asking very directly will net you a lot of information. They'll either say no, and why do you ask? In which case you would just back up and say, well, here's what I saw. And of all the times I've asked people, I've been wrong more than I've been right. And I've never had somebody get angry with me, which isn't to say they never would. But usually people are like, well, thank you for asking. Like, I'm so, they're touched that you cared enough to say something, even though they weren't feeling, particularly like it was a crisis. So they'll either say no, or they'll say yes, in which case then you move on to get them the help that they need, or they'll say nothing, or they'll say, Young people will say meh a lot, which we don't know what that means. But that kind of answer is still an answer that we treat like a yes answer. And how I follow up with that is, tell me why you're quiet. I'm curious why you're pausing. It's really okay to step into that and to kind of lean into that a little bit and really kind of try to open a line of communication, because it's not okay to talk about it. Like or maybe I've talked about it and received some heavy pushback, because it scares people. When I express that I feel like I'm in crisis, then the people around me are scared for me. And so people might react in a big way, so they kind of shut down, and then it becomes a lot more kind of, behind the scenes and just kind of hints that I'm dropping or signs that maybe I'm, not doing well, and they're just waiting for someone to step in and ask. And asking the question does not make me more likely.
That's what I was going to ask. If you start talking about it, is that something that gives them ideas or whatever, or do you find that to be true? No.
Nope. The research suggests that if it's occurred to you, it's occurred to them.
Okay.
So in most cases, if you look at someone and think, I wonder, it has occurred to them prior. So
better to say something than not to say something.
Yep, better to say and to open the line of communication and make it, put yourself in a position of, I'm a safe person to talk to, and I'll be calm, and there's two of us now. You don't have to do whatever it is you're doing. You don't have to do it by yourself. We can walk through this together. Just, I think when I talk to people and when I, have been in community, I look for hopelessness. So if I'm hearing words that make me think hopeless or desperation, those are the kinds of things that make me think, oh, I should follow up. And you'd usually know that, if it's somebody that you're in relationship with, there would be signs.
Sure.
And not always, but the bulk majority of the time, there'll be things that will make you think, oh, I wonder how they're doing. And I think what we do is we'll put them on our list of people to check up on. Like, I'm putting them in my back pocket to kind of see if maybe what I'm sensing is accurate. And what I would love to see is the minute I think, oh, that's not like Kathie, that I would just turn around and ask you, Kathie, how are you? And here's what I'm seeing that's making me think maybe something's going on, would you like to talk?
But for people who don't feel really comfortable with that kind of a conversation, or maybe they don't know that if they have that kind of relationship with the person,
Sure.
What are some resources or some ways to suggest they get help? I mean, I know sometimes people would rather have the personal connection,
Sure.
but if that's not something you feel comfortable with, where can you
Sure.
sort of what services are there?
Sure. So the national hotline always is a resource. Centerpoint also has a crisis line. So we have a local in Lincoln resource that you can use, and the national hotline for Nebraska routes through Boys Town. So it's practically local. I mean, it's Omaha.
Sure.
So both of those are within the state, and then also they can start with a primary care physician. As long as we make sure and mention, that a lot of times we just lead with the physical. I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, and some doctors will ask, but they can start primary care, and often that's not a bad idea to eliminate any physical things that might be presenting themselves. If it was a vitamin D issue, well, let's take care of that, and then, let's knock the things down. So
Sure.
Physical should always come first. So primary care, there's so much, we are resource rich in Lincoln. So there's lots of counseling available. Hope Spoke, if it's a young person. If it's a young person and I maybe don't have a relationship with the family, a lot of schools in Lincoln have SCIP, school community prevention. So you can call and ask to talk to the SCIP team coordinator, and just you can make an anonymous, or you can put your name on it and they won't pass that along. Like, I'm concerned about
Sure.
this young person, here's what I've seen, and then they'll pull the young person in, they pull the family in. So use all of those. It's really important, I think, that we become resourceful. Because I think when stuff like this presents itself, either to me, like I'm experiencing a crisis, or to somebody I care about, so I'm walking through it with them, that it becomes, we just sort of get tunnel vision, and it becomes very difficult to figure out what's the next step to take.
Right.
But there are lots of resources and lots of places that you can turn. You can get additional training. I gave you just a really brief, how would you ask the question? There's an entire training called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, that you can access. Region 5 puts that on for free. You can register and attend that at our office every other month. And then there are 50 trainers throughout the southeast portion of Nebraska, and then more, as you go across the state, there's 50 trainers that you can have come train. We train at workplaces, we train at schools, and it's just a good kind of, how do I intervene? What do I look for? How do I intervene if I feel like there's a crisis situation? You could also, and that's about an hour and a half, but if you're looking for something more in terms of mental health, there's mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid, and we also do that monthly at the region that you can sign up and take for free. And that's just increasing noticing skills. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a clinician, but I can look at you and think, oh, I don't know that you're doing well.
Well, and that's called QPR.
QPR, Question,
Okay.
Persuade,
And we'll
Refer.
put that on the website too.
Yep,
All
we'd
right,
love that.
let's talk about this new, or that's not real new right now, but I
Right.
mean, it's coming out, the initiative called Hope Squads in our
Sure.
schools. So can you talk about that?
Yes, I love the Hope Squads. I think it's so great. So it came out of Provo, Utah. Greg Hudnall was an administrator there, and actually left his position to figure out what we were going to do about youth suicide in his community, and it's grown from there. So just recently it's left Utah and gone to some other states. And so Nebraska, because we do have high rates with youth suicide, far higher than our adult suicide, started to take a look at that. We've had him come twice and train groups of school staff, so an advisor can be anybody in the building. So lots of social workers, some administrators. Like, it looks different, it gets put together differently from building to building depending on who has the passion for it.
Okay.
And so what makes it unique is that it's peers identify other peers. So I, as a student, identify 3 people that I think I would talk to them if I had a concern. So it sort of picks out, you know, kids who are empathic and kids who are listening. And then the advisor, you take all of those names and then cull that list a little bit, because there would be kids who wouldn't be a good fit, either because they've got their own stuff, or they will say, I'm too busy, I can't. And so you take those interested kids then, and then they get trained, like heavily trained in noticing skills, and they get trained in QPR. And then they really just become eyes and ears in the building. So, which I love. I think that's great to give kids, you know, a piece of this and some agency to be able to know what to do. And so we commonly hear that puts so much pressure on kids, which I love when people say that, whether it's administration or teachers or, you know, parents or community members, because I think that's taking care of our kids, and we should be doing that. But what research is showing is that young people are way more likely to talk to a peer than they are to talk to an adult. And what's happening is that they're already talking to their peers. And so many times the kids who get selected are already doing this.
Okay.
But they're doing it with no support.
Right.
So but 2 in the morning on their phone,
Yeah.
texting with somebody who just like, I just don't know what to do. And so it takes that group of kids and probably some additional kids and trains them. Here's what you do. And what you do is, if I identify a classmate or they come to me and identify that I'm struggling, is I say, come with me to go see the advisor. I love her, she's great, and if you won't go see my advisor, who in the building do you trust? Is it a coach? Is it an administrator? Is it the counselor? And then I take you there. So it trains those kids, it trains the rest of the building administration and the rest of the staff to really, like, how do we respond and how do we care for kids who are experiencing a crisis, whatever that crisis is. Like, it runs the gamut of all the way over to like a mental health issue that maybe is coming on or has been identified, to a crisis I'm experiencing because I didn't get into the college I wanted, or I didn't make the play this year, or I missed a catch in the football game. You know, it can look like lots of things, and we don't,
Sure.
as adults in the building, we may miss that. But kids will not.
Right.
And they're connected on social media, and so it's just how it's onboarding life skills for them. Like, how do I do, if I'm concerned about you, how do I connect you in a way that's helpful? Not that I'm doing it, because my job is to be a 16-year-old or 17 or however old, but who do I take you to? And it's about, again, becoming resourceful.
That's great.
Yeah.
So how many Hope Squads do we have in Lincoln?
So currently, there are 2 that are active. There's one that did all of the prep work last year and is starting this year, and then we did a training on the 20th of September, so just last week, and trained all of the rest of the high schools in Lincoln. LPS and then Pius also attended, which was great.
That's fantastic.
And
So
then
you have all the schools involved now.
Yep, all of the high schools, and then there's it goes all the way from elementary to collegiate. So SEC campuses are looking at how would that look on our campus. York College is looking at it. Peru is looking at it, and then we've got elementary Hope Squads in York. And they are precious. I did their little kind of onboarding training with their parents and the kids, and that is a neat group of young people.
That's great.
So elementary, middle, high school. Here in Lincoln, I think it's mostly high school for now, which is fine. So as they become ready or decide, you know, here's how this would look, because there is some work up front to have every student identify 3 students, and then figure out what to do with that list, like cull that list so that it's really representative of our school and its kids, you know, we think can handle it. That's some work up front.
Sure.
So we really appreciate that the schools are so willing to do that, and then to spend some extra time, you know, training and working with these students. It's just wonderful. I've interviewed, there's a video on YouTube that we can maybe link for you of the Lincoln High Hope Squad, which was one of the first ones that got going. And you just watch it and think, wow, yeah, these are not kids who are under a tremendous amount of pressure. These are kids who are like, yeah, I want to change.
This is what I want to do.
Yeah, I want to change and help in my
Now,
school.
are other students in the school aware of who is on the Hope Squad?
Yeah, there are T-shirts, which is almost always they do a shirt that they wear either weekly or monthly. I've seen them do locker signs on the Hope Squad members' lockers. They do Hope Week typically, so they pick a week during the year that works for them and then do different activities. The Beatrice Middle School Hope Squad does some neat stuff for Hope Week. There have been schools that have put a Valentine on every locker for Valentine's Day. So it's really just about changing the culture of and stigma busting.
Sure,
like this,
and
it is
talking
okay.
about it.
Yeah, you're valuable, and we want you to stay, and it's okay to talk about it. And here's who to go to, and here's the adults that are adults in the building that are safe to go to, which they were safe to go to before, but maybe I wouldn't have.
Right.
Or it wasn't okay, or it's for a host of reasons I wasn't comfortable talking about
Right.
it.
And from what you were saying, actually talking about it is better than not talking about it.
It absolutely is.
Bringing it out and having young people interact and talk about this is something that then can hopefully make a difference for us, because obviously not talking about it has not been working either.
Right.
Well, Terri, we want to thank Terri Effle for being here from Region 5 Systems, and she is the preventative specialist. And as you can hear, Terri has many great things to tell us about this topic. And we really hope that we have been able to give you some information, and certainly we're going to put some things at the end here of the program. We want to thank the Women's Foundation of Lincoln and Lancaster County for being our host today. We also want to give special thanks to the Community Health Foundation, or the Community Health Endowment, for providing some funding for the program for today. And please do join us on lincolnwomen.org to see other ones of our women's health programs. And of course, you can see these on YouTube and LNK Health as well. So thank you, Terri, very much.
Thank you for having me.
And if you have other questions, I'm sure that Terri and lots of her co-workers will be glad to answer those questions for you. And thank you for joining us today. This has been Women's Health.